Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We are diving into Chapter 13 of the American Yawp today, and we're going to take a look at one of the most intense periods of American history. There's a lot going on because we're looking at the 1840s and the 1850s. We are on the doorsteps of the American Civil War. This is the Sectional Crisis. Now, we'll be unpacking the causes and key events that's going to deepen the divide between North and South. It's going to lay the groundwork for the Civil War. It is a complicated story, a lot more than just, there's economics issues here, there's social issues, there's a bunch. So if you're studying American history or just curious about how the nation reached its breaking point, stick around. We'll explore this crucial chapter. Now, the story begins, it could be argued, with the Missouri Compromise, 1820. This is Congress's first big attempt to keep the peace between North and South. Missouri was admitted as a slave state. Maine came in as a free state. And it's going to keep the balance of power in the Congress, or more specifically, in the Senate. Now, perhaps even more importantly, this compromise is going to establish a line at the 3630 mark that's going to effectively say no slavery in the new territories north of this line. Now, there's a few exceptions, but just a few. Now, discussing this whole issue of keeping the balance in the Senate, I mentioned this in videos prior, but the House of Representatives is expanding greatly with northern population. The northern states are growing with immigration and other factors. And so remember that the states with the biggest population have the more members of the House of Representatives. But the Senate is 2. Every state has 2. And so if you can keep the balance between slave states and free states, then one section of the country doesn't feel like they are always getting outvoted by the other. Now, at first glance, this Missouri Compromise looks like a pretty fair solution. But this compromise also served as just a Band-Aid over a much larger issue. Where will slavery be allowed to expand? Remember, we're in that period of time with the Great Awakening, and there's some changing thoughts on the issues of slavery and so on and so forth. And so as we will see, the U.S. expanded westward, and the question is going to be, where do we allow slavery and where do we keep it out? This is going to be a powder keg waiting to explode as we see these issues pretty much going through Congress and through the media and various other places. Now, by the 1840s, the concept of manifest destiny had swept across the country. Americans felt it was their God-given right to expand westward from Atlantic to Pacific. But with the addition of new lands from Mexico during the Mexican-American War, with the acquisition, the annexation of Texas, California, the issue of slavery's expansion comes back with a vengeance. Now, one significant attempt to deal with this was the Wilmot Proviso, or Proviso. I'm not real sure the way to pronounce it. I've always said Proviso, so that's what I'm going with. This was in 1846, and it was proposed by David Wilmot, who I believe was a representative from the state of New York. And so as we're fighting a war with Mexico, it's pretty clear that we're going to win this thing. The proposal suggested that slavery should be banned in any territory acquired from Mexico. If we fight the war, we are not going to allow slavery in any lands that we gain from Mexico. That was the basic text of the proviso. Now, even though it didn't pass, the Wilmot Proviso is going to heighten tensions and split political parties. It's going to reinforce the stark divide between pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions. In fact, we're going to start to see the disintegration of the Whig Party, by the way. So as we move into the 1850s, we're going to see a political landscape start to change. The Whig Party, which had some anti-slavery roots, was struggling to stay united as the sectional tensions grow. Northern Whigs were largely against slavery. Southern Whigs were more tolerant of it. So the Democratic Party, which is largely a rural Southern party here, not only Southern, but it's going to manage to maintain its influence. It's going to keep its groups unified, even if it meant sidestepping slavery issues. They just don't talk about it. Now, there's a new party on the scene. It's called the Free Soil Party, and it's formed in 1848 in response to the Mexican-American War. The Free Soil Party was clear in its purpose: no slavery in the Western territories. Their slogan was free soil, free speech, free labor, free men, making it clear that they saw slavery as a threat to free labor. It's not that they are fighting slavery on a moral issue. They don't want to compete with slaves out west because you don't pay slaves salary. These men are wanting salary pay, or they're wanting to be paid for their labor. It's the reason that immigration really doesn't happen in the South much. How do you compete with how do you compete with slaves in the South? Because you're not paying slaves. You want to make money for your labor. So this is an important moment because the Free Soil Party is going to lay the foundation for what would later become the Republican Party. It's going to combine with several others to form what we know as the Republican Party 1850s. It's going to see the rise of Abraham Lincoln. Its rise is going to reflect the growing Northern sentiment that saw slavery not just as a moral issue, but an economic and social one as well. Now let's move on to some major legislative attempts to calm the situation down, which would only serve to really fire things up worse. First, the Compromise of 1850. Now this bundle of 5 laws admits California as a free state and allows popular sovereignty in Utah and the New Mexico territories. But there's a catch. It included a stricter fugitive slave law, something that the southern states had wanted, and we've had a fugitive slave law since 1793, but it's sort of not been enforced, and the Southerners are saying we need to enforce this thing. It demanded that escaped slaves be returned to their owners, even if they made it to a free state. Now, a little bit of background. Why all of a sudden is California on the scene when we just finished a war that brought California in? Gold is discovered in 1849, and when that happens, the population of California is going to absolutely explode. Just overnight, it has enough people to start the process of statehood. Well, the thing is, the folks moving there tended to be, they're not owning land, they're digging for gold, they're shop owners and whatever. It's not a place that slavery is going to be practical. So they don't want slavery within their borders, even though if you follow the old line from the Missouri Compromise, it cuts California in half. Also, Texas is going to be reduced in size. New Mexico is so far from Austin that, quite frankly, New Mexico doesn't want to be a part of Texas. It's a different culture anyway. And so Texas gives up a chunk of basically half of what is today New Mexico, a part of Oklahoma, a part of Colorado, and a part of Wyoming, in exchange for much of its debts being paid from its old republic days. So there we go. Now back to the fugitive slave law. The fugitive slave law did not go over well in the North. Many saw the fugitive slave law as morally unacceptable, and as a result, resistance grew. The idea of civil disobedience is going to really come on the scene. Fight against the laws that you view as unjust. As a result, resistance is going to grow. Abolitionists are going to double down, the Underground Railroad will intensify, and Northern resentment toward the South is going to continue to grow. And the South is going to start to resent the North for some of the things that they are saying about the South. Political division. Now, then came the Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854. It introduced the idea of popular sovereignty, letting the residents of a territory vote on whether to allow slavery. And this sounded democratic in theory, but it led to violent clashes in Kansas, known as Bleeding Kansas, when pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers literally are fighting for control of the state, especially as decisions are going to be made over the status, slave state or free state, for Kansas when the day comes for statehood. And this was an early taste of the violence that would erupt during the American Civil War. And then there's the Dred Scott case, 1857. The Supreme Court is going to rule that African Americans were not citizens and they had no right to sue in federal court. Even more, the court said that Congress had no authority to prohibit slavery in the territories, effectively nullifying the Missouri Compromise. Now, a little bit about Dred Scott. Who was he? He was a slave belonging to a doctor, and this doctor took him into some of the northern territories because he was an army surgeon. Well, if you live for a number of years in free territory as a slave, does that make you free? Well, when the doctor died, that's exactly the argument Dred Scott's going to make. However, his master's widow says, no, you still belong to me. There's a big court case. Missouri courts say, no, you are free. It goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically sidesteps the issue by saying, we understand this. We understand what you're going for, but you are a slave, which means not a citizen, which means you cannot sue in court. We should never have heard this. Missouri court should never have heard this. That's the argument that will be made. And again, nullifies the issue of where slavery can be limited. And again, very divisive decision. So there we are. Now, the decision outraged abolitionists, many Northerners who saw this as an extreme overreach, basically making legal slavery across the entire country if the Southern states wanted to enforce it that way. even states that had it specifically in their codes that slavery would not be allowed. Now, finally, if we see the peak crisis with events like John Brown's raid. And there's some other ones that if you were in my class face-to-face, we'd talk about, like the caning of Charles Sumner and some of those things. Time is limited, so let's stick with this. John Brown in 1859 wants to see slavery ended. He's a radical abolitionist. He had been involved in the events of Bleeding Kansas as well. But in 1859, he sort of has disappeared and he comes back on the scene. And he attempts to incite a slave rebellion in northern Virginia. It's not successful. He puts the word out to the slaves of neighboring plantations, meet me at the Federal Armory at Harper's Ferry. I'll give you guns. We're going to go on a killing spree, and we will end slavery. Well, the fact of the matter is, nobody showed up to help him. He's there. His sons are there, some other supporters, but all the slaves from the nearby areas don't show up. John Brown is captured. Several of his sons are shot. I believe some are killed. Brown himself is not, but he will be tried for inciting slave uprising, slave insurrection, and he will be executed by the state of Virginia. And many are going to view him as a martyr to the cause of abolition. So by 1860, the nation is deeply divided. The Democratic Party is split along regional lines. And the newly formed Republican Party, which had come on the scene in 1856, is going to see its second presidential election, running Abraham Lincoln as its nominee. Abraham Lincoln was a lawyer from Illinois. Kind of has that back home air about him, but don't let it fool you. He was a very powerful individual in Illinois politics. Now, the new Republican platform, though, did oppose the expansion of slavery, not the ending of slavery itself, but the expansion of slavery. Nominating Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln sort of reflects that vision. His election was the last straw for the South, though. Things he had said for the last 15 years, especially during the Lincoln-Douglas debates, are going to cause many in the South to fear a Lincoln presidency. And so when he's elected in 1860, it's after December the 20th, when the ultimate reading of the ballots, when the confirmation of the vote is going to be made, the first state to say, that's it, I'm gone, is South Carolina. They had threatened it before with a tariff of abominations. Now they are going to carry out the threat they had made 30 years ago over what they viewed as sort of not being treated equally in this federal union. Whether that's true or not, that's how they felt. So thanks for watching this breakdown of Chapter 13 and a little bit of commentary on the side as well. We've talked about this as a sectional crisis. This is a period of crucial understanding. This period is crucial for understanding how the United States is going to reach a point of no return with slavery, political division, economic differences. We didn't really talk about the economic differences, but that's important too. So if you found this helpful, please give me a thumb up, give me some comments, and I will be continuing to make these videos until I get them all done. Reach out to me if there's anything you would like to see specifically, and good luck on your test down the road.